All right, we are recording. Good morning, everyone. My name is Diana Schulach. Thank you for being here today for our workshop with State Council on Developmental Disabilities. We have Sofia Cervantes today. She's going to be presenting our anti-bullying strategies workshop for Family Focus. Thank you so much, Sofia. She offers these workshops when we can get her once or twice a year on different topics. So we're very lucky to have her here today. We will be putting in the chat reminders that this is in English. Tomorrow, this workshop will be offered in Spanish. We'll also be reminding you to sign up for our Family Focus newsletter, and we will also be including the link to the YouTube channel so that when we do post this, you can watch this again. Sofia does always provide all her materials, so you will be getting those slides. She actually puts it into a Google folder for us, and so she'll be sharing with us in a moment how to access all of the materials, but we will also be including it in an email following up this workshop, just so in case you didn't access it or didn't save it, you will still have another chance to get it. We will also at that time be sending State Council's survey, the Family Focus survey, which we always like to have, as well as the link to the YouTube recording. So make sure that you follow our newsletter for any other upcoming workshops that we have happening. Family Focus is also having our All Abilities resource fair, as you can see by my virtual background, Saturday, October 19th. So please make sure that you are there. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sofia. Good morning, Sofia.
Good morning, Diana, and good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. We always appreciate this collaboration and the fact that we can provide this also through recording and you can watch whenever it's convenient for you. So good morning. Hope everyone's doing well. Hope everyone's weather is decent wherever you are. So my name is Sofia Cervantes, as Diana mentioned, and I'm with the State Council on Developmental Disabilities. We are a state advocacy agency. And so our role is to provide support, advocacy support to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, their families, and to impact the systems that support our community of individuals with disabilities. And so we support the community by providing what's called technical assistance, which all that means is you can feel free to call us and we can answer your questions. We also do capacity building, so training such as this one on a range of topics. Precisely, our office offers trainings every Monday at 10 a.m. And one Monday we offer the topic in English, and then the following week, the following Monday, we repeat the same topic in Spanish. And so we find that that's a best practice to be able to provide that same topic separately, natively in English and then natively in Spanish. And so we invite you to that. In the Google Drive that I've prepared for us all, you will see flyers for that. And then going back to our role, our third role is to create systemic change. Right. And so to change policies and laws and regulations that impact access to services, quality of services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So today, we'll be focusing on anti-bullying strategies and self-advocacy. And I'll sort of explain the joining of sort of those two concepts and topics. So first, I'd just like to direct you to the chat. On the chat, I've placed a link, and actually let me do it once more if individuals just got in. And Diana and Sean, please feel free to continue copying that on the chat if you would, for people that join us after. But so when you join this, or when you click on this link, you will see a Google Drive. And so you will see a folder for English and a folder for Spanish. You'll have the same resources on both. If you click on English, you'll see that the first document has a little star, and that's our PowerPoint for today that I'll be sharing on the screen shortly. Okay, and then the rest are related materials that we will talk about, including a booklet on bullying for children, which is titled Enough is Enough. And then in our work with self-advocates, when we would talk about bullying, adults with disabilities would tell us, hey, we get bullied too. And so we created a booklet called Adults Get Bullied Too, what people with disabilities and the people who support them can do about it. And so please know that these resources are available to you. We will talk a little bit toward the end about how this topic of anti-bullying can translate into potential needed services for yourself, for your son or your daughter. And so we have here an IEP strategy booklet and an IPP. In the presentation, we'll talk about how there may be relevant goals related to bullying that we can include under regional center services and under special education services, depending what the need is and what the circumstance is. And so we've also placed these two booklets in there for your convenience and your review. And any of these materials, once you've reviewed them, as you have questions, please feel free to reach out. Okay? Awesome. So can you all see the presentation now, anti-bullying and self-advocacy, and it's got a stop sign on the screen? Yep, good. Thank you very much. I appreciate the thumbs up. Nothing worse, right, than like the speaker talking and referencing a slide and we can see nothing. So I'm glad. All right, so our focus today, our topic is anti-bullying and self-advocacy. So as we talk about bullying, I like to sort of sprinkle all throughout how we can consider preventing bullying with the development of foundational skills within for our children, teens, adults, right? So the concept of bullying exists, and we'll talk about sort of who becomes more vulnerable for bullying. And as we explore that, then at the same time, thinking what and how can I support my son or daughter to develop foundational skills that will allow them, one, to perhaps become less of that target for bullying, two, to be able to defend themselves in the event of any bullying against them. Three, I'd even also like for us to consider how do we prevent the bullying from happening in providing services and foundational skills for the person acting on the bullying or the bully, if you would, right? There's been trainings where very transparently, some parents have raised their hand and have said, actually, I have a question. My son is the bully, right? My son is the one that has difficulty with X, Y, and Z. And so it's important to consider this bullying topic perhaps more holistically than we have in the past, right? That as we look at this topic of bullying, there are different contributing factors, and how can we address all of them, right? And so as we talk about bullying, again, keeping in mind what services and supports might the individuals behind this bullying need, right? What might the person doing the bullying need, and what might the person experiencing the bullying need? One, to even prevent it, right? To even prevent it from occurring and or responding to it. And then one step further, from maybe interjecting into a bullying situation. How can a person help if they're looking at the bullying that's happening, right? How can they be a person of support to someone experiencing this scenario? And so I really enjoy the fact that anytime that we do a topic, we kind of learn, right, from the audience, from self-advocates that give us their input. And so we find that our dialogue, our conversation about this topic really has room for expansion, right? And so in the past, when I would do this presentation, it was on kind of just the bullying and the anti-bullying. And then I said, it really has to do with self-advocacy as well, and really the acquiring of services that are needed for foundational skills that sometimes lead to this bullying, right? So sort of as we discuss this topic, always weaving into our mind, if this is occurring, what does that mean for us, right? What does that mean for my son or daughter? What might he or she need? Okay. And so as we talk about bullying, even before we define bullying, then I'd like for us to think about this concept of self-advocacy, right? By definition, self-advocacy is the action of representing oneself, our own perspective, and our interests. And if you may agree or disagree, and I pause here actually to say, please feel free to interact on the chat. I will, sort of be having my eye on the chat. If you have questions that I could weave into the presentation, please feel free. This can be a dialogue through the chat. And so when we look at bullying occurring and we think of self-advocacy, we may consider that if in our culture, right, and I'll call it a culture of disabilities, if we emphasize this topic of self-advocacy more, then I wonder, right, if bullying among our community would have become lesser. Because there, as we'll learn in just a little bit, we find that there are certain characteristics of a person that may make them more of a target for bullying. And let's remove disability for a second, right? Even as I think of my own upbringing, right, I think of my household culture. And I think of the fact that I'm grateful to my parents, the fact that in our house culture, self-advocacy was a thing. My dad is, he's shifting now, but he was a very tall man, very assertive voice, very loud voice. But I really appreciate that whenever my dad had something strong to say, he would then say, okay, now you go. What's your opinion? Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? And I found that to be empowering, even as a child, right? To say, okay, my dad has very strong feelings about this, and yet there's room for my thoughts on this. And so very little, I learned at a very young age, I learned I have thoughts and they're respected and they're meant to be shared. And so fast forward years later, I love that I'm an advocate, right? And one might ask, ourselves, like, well, does that contribute to the person that we become? And in this topic of bullying, does that contribute to then me being less of a target for bullying and me maybe being the person who stood up for other people, right? And interjected that bullying. And so as we think of self-advocacy, we can begin to ask ourselves, well, how much do I encourage and create space and enforce the development of self-advocacy for my son or daughter? Right? Or if you're a professional here in the room, for the people that I serve. I always like to share, I am not a parent. And so I like saying that because I don't pretend to know that I know. I know what I don't know, right? I do feel very blessed to, I've entered so many homes throughout the years that I've been in the field of disability, which has been over 20 years now. Incredible to say that actually. But since 2003, right? I began to work with individuals in their home. And so I've been blessed to be able to see a lot of family dynamics, a lot of homes. And one thing that I've seen, right, is that very often for people with disabilities, and you may agree, particularly if they have less verbal communication or are nonverbal, this self-advocacy piece does not always have space in the home, in the classroom, in the community, right? That if someone may have difficulty with their communication, then it's like we ask less of their opinion or we consider their opinion less. And so by nature, not ill-intentioned, but by nature, we sort of, this topic of self-advocacy is not in the forefront, right? And so as we dive into this conversation about bullying, I'd like to, excuse me, keep this in our minds of self-advocacy. With the topic of bullying, how am I encouraging self-advocacy? Which could maybe be on the other spectrum of being a person who is experiencing bullying. On the other spectrum of that could be a person who's a self-advocate and can defend themselves, right? And not even physically, just with their character and their words, right? So self-advocacy is a right. And again, sometimes when a person has a disability, and again, when they have less maybe verbal skills or, verbal communication, then we work on that less. But I think it's a good reminder that self-advocacy is a right. And so it's important for us to maybe self-evaluate, and as a parent, as a self-advocate myself, as a professional myself, how am I creating opportunity for the development of self-advocacy? It's also important to consider that because self-advocacy is developed over time, it's really never too early to begin working on it, right? Again, I reference my childhood. And am so grateful, right, that I had that experience growing up, and for our community of individuals with disabilities as they begin to receive special education services, as they begin to have therapists come into their home, right? How can we make self-advocacy a primary goal? As little as they are, or as adolescent or as adult as they are, there is always room for working towards self-advocacy. It's never too late and it's never too early, right? A young child, we can create space for self-advocacy, right? I always have this image as I talk about this of if a person within their own home is not used to being asked their opinion, is sort of left on the sidelines, maybe even sometimes made fun of in their own home, how will that person even recognize that they're being bullied when they are being bullied within the school or in the community? If this sort of atmosphere of I'm not considered very much, I'm not asked for my opinion, if this is customary to that person, then when they experience bullying, sadly, it may just feel like just another Tuesday for them, right? Because that may sort of be the rhythm that they walk to, right? That may be the way that they're used to being treated. And so it's never too early to create that culture and to enforce that culture, right? If maybe you're a supervisor, right, and you supervise staff who work with individuals, what a great time to consider, is self-advocacy kind of woven into all of our goal areas? Because it has room for it. And again, thinking that if we do this, just perhaps we could be working toward minimizing bullying and definitely minimizing how prevalent bullying is among our community of individuals with disabilities. So it's also important to remember that self-advocacy is demonstrated in different ways, right? And so just because someone has a certain sensory sensitivity and may manifest certain behaviors, or just because a person is nonverbal does not mean that they don't have an opinion to share, right? And in my work with families, I remember always when I primarily had individuals that had limited communication or used alternative methods of communication. And it was always interesting to see the treatment of that person versus their other child who was verbal, right? And so even when a person doesn't have verbal communication, I don't know if you'll agree, but we definitely know when they don't like something, whether it's through a vocalization, a gesture, a facial, change. There is self-advocacy happening. It may just look different. So it may require of our awareness to recognize they're advocating for themselves. And although they may not be telling me verbally, we need to hone on that skill and say, that's good. I can see that you didn't like me doing that. You're advocating for yourself. Let's maybe work on how you can express that so that anyone can understand that you're saying, I don't like that, right? And so honing on those skills and making them a focus, right? So that said, again, setting the stage for self-advocacy really being the preventative skill that can be related to bullying, right? So now as we look at bullying, right, and let me just make sure that I haven't missed anything on the chat. Okay, so as we talk about bullying, what is bullying, right? So bullying is something, someone doing something that you do not like, right? So something being done unto you out of your consent. You do not like it. You did not ask for it. It is not welcomed. Um, and bullying may take different forms, right? And so it may be someone saying something like name calling. It may be physical assault, touching someone in a way that they do not like and that they did not give consent to, and that they did not welcome. Bullying may take the form of threats, right? Saying they are going to do something to the person if they don't comply with X, Y, and Z, or just a threat because bullying may look like writing messages about the person that makes them feel embarrassed or ashamed. And then lastly, it can look like using pictures of the person without the person's consent. And these things now open up considering all of the social media platforms that are available, right? Maybe we could say in the past, maybe bullying was condensed to only a physical setting, like the school, right? Like your classroom. But now it expands, right, to the internet. And I've often heard, man, people get very brave on the internet, right? They don't have to show face. And so we may see that a lot of the bullying may come through the form of written messages or using pictures, almost defiling the picture, right? Drawing on it, making obscene things on the picture, even threats, but over the internet, right? And so saying things over the internet. So the bullying extends now to even non-physical spaces, right? And so also the potential then for bullying has increased that much more, right? You don't just have to be in the classroom to experience bullying or the potential of bullying, but here we are. I can be on my phone and I may experience bullying through social media. And so indeed we see that bullying can be verbal, it can be physical, social, and now through cyberbullying, right? And again, I want to come back to as we look at these categories and we think about preventative things for bullying. If I look at my child, right, my son or daughter, I may wonder, if bullying can take place verbally, physically, socially, and on the internet, I may consider these bullet points to be goal areas for my son or daughter. In the verbal sphere, does my son or daughter need support? Because if they were experiencing bullying, can they tell me? Right? What resources do they have? What foundational skills do they have to express what's happening to them? Right? As we look at the fact that bullying can take place physically, I may ask myself, how does my son or daughter know how to defend themselves physically? And by saying that, I don't mean how to punch back necessarily, because we'll talk about that and how that may not be the best first option, right? But physically, is my son or daughter coordinated or have adaptive equipment or equipment in general to be able to flee the scene, if you would, to be able to move away from the space where bullying is taking place, right? Or does that mean that they need a physical support person, right? A person, a one-on-one, a personal assistant, someone to accompany them in these spaces because perhaps their physical skills may be endangering the fact that if they can't get away from a bullying situation, right? Then socially, knowing that bullying occurs socially, one may ask, themselves, what social skills does my son or daughter have? And is there a need for developing goals for increasing social skills? Is that needed? And then even in this realm of cyberbullying, because bullying occurs through the internet, what internet education or literacy does my son or daughter have? How do they know how to recognize what sites may be safe and which aren't? Right? Do they know how to stay safe on the internet? How to not reply to a person who asks them for their personal information, like their address and their, email and phone number and whatever they may ask for, or for money, right? So as we look at the different spheres, if you would, of bullying, then is there space within those spheres to include goal areas for my son or daughter, right? Do they need to get increased skill in these various areas? This is such an important topic overall, right? Among all populations, among all ages, and then particularly among people with disabilities. What we see here in some studies from 2017 and 2020 is 1 out of 5 students, so school aged, 1 out of 5 students is bullied. Okay, not related to a disability. These are just statistics about 1 out of 5 students is bullied. And then we see that individuals with disabilities are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience bullying, right? So already 1 out of 5 is pretty high. If you look at a classroom typically has what? Hopefully 20, 25. I hear sometimes there's 40, right? But in a classroom of 20, at least 5 are being bullied. And then if there's children with disabilities in that classroom, then based on these statistics, they are even 2 to 3 times more likely to experience bullying, right? And so we highlight this and recognize that this is of high concern. This is a really prominent thing that occurs among our community, right? So I'm not going to take time to show the video, but I'd like you to know that I've placed the video here. And again, you have access to this presentation and to this video. And it's a video created by middle school students. They are the actors themselves. And the video has 2 parts. In one part, they demonstrate a scene of bullying, social, and what that might look like within the school. And then they sort of break the video and now they replay the same scenes, but with a person, another student sort of interjecting and advocating for that bullying to stop. And so I offer this video. Sometimes we watch it, but really I offer it because sometimes it can be a great tool for you to even begin the conversation with your son or daughter about bullying. We can use this video and say, hey, I was hearing this training, or however you may say it, right? But they showed this video about bullying and I wanted to watch it with you, right? What do you think about what's happening, right? We could ask our son or daughter or the individual that we support or work with, that this can be an indirect way of talking about bullying and perhaps even highlighting what it looks like. Because a lot of individuals, again, may not even know that they are experiencing bullying. If your son or daughter, right, maybe is working on recognizing and referencing social skills and nonverbal communication and sort of picking up on the social nuances, they may not recognize factors like, oh, they're not laughing with you, they're laughing at you, right? They may not even recognize I'm being bullied. She may consider these people their friends. And I say this based off of an example of someone I worked with, right? This person would come and tell me, oh yeah, we were in a circle and we were all laughing. I have great friends, right? And as I dug more into, and what does that circle look like? Where are you standing? Where are they standing? And what are they saying? And when do you guys laugh? As we explored that, I said, oh man, they're bullying him, right? And because he sees happy faces around him and he sees himself surrounded by people, he's here thinking, I just spent time with my friends during lunch. All while the content of the jokes and the conversation was against him, right? And so there may be times where sort of dissecting and breaking down these social scenarios is what's important. I also worked with a gentleman and he was an adult. He was probably maybe 32 at the time. And he was very into YouTube influencers and all of that. And so he would sometimes post YouTube videos and people would comment. And all he was seeing is people are responding to my videos. And even as he read the content of what the comment said, he wasn't picking up on the sarcasm or the expressions, the nuances that indicated they were actually being very cruel and mean to him through messages. But all he saw was, man, my inbox is flooded with messages. This is cool, right? And so it's almost a hard thing to do, right? To tell someone what you think has been good is actually not, right? And so sometimes what we have to do is demonstrations like this. They may not have the references to say, this is what's happening to me at school. Because again, they themselves may not be recognizing that it's happening. But when we can use a video as an example, then perhaps we can start breaking down social scenarios that then we can later work on them connecting with their own scenarios. I hope that makes sense, right? So indirectly breaking down these social scenarios, and then in time and through working on it, through different services and all that, then maybe they begin to recognize, hey, well, they say that to me too. Are they being mean to me too? Right? That they can think now more critically about their scenarios because we've taken the time to break down social scenarios in an indirect fashion, right? Through videos and through actors like the ones that are on here. So bullying is definitely a concern, not just what may occur in that brief moment, but the effects that it has even after the bullying occurs, right? So, from what we know, bullying can cause headaches and stomach aches, sometimes real because of anxiety or because of nervousness that they truly feel a stomach ache, or they may be saying they have a stomach ache to avoid going to school. They may be experiencing, or bullying may cause sleeping problems, right? Perhaps the nervousness of going to sleep in anticipation of tomorrow I have to go to school and face this again, right? Encounter the bullying again. And so they may be scared of going to school, and that itself may be impacting their sleeping patterns. It may cause low self esteem, right? And how not? If the person is capturing all of the things that the person, or that, the people that are bullying them are saying, of course it's going to impact their self-esteem, their self-confidence. It can cause intense feelings of sadness, right, to the point of depression. It can cause intense feelings of worry, which can look like anxiety. And because of bullying, especially depending on how long the bullying occurs, then we can see the development of maybe even post-traumatic stress, right? They may even take that onto their next school experience. They may have experienced bullying for a few months. Now they don't even see those people. Now they're at a new school. Bullying is not a problem, but they may now experience post-traumatic stress, PTSD, right? They may, every time they cross a corner or turn a corner, they may anticipate the bullying because perhaps that's when the bullying took place. Every time that they go out to lunch, they may experience that PTSD, perhaps, right? If that's when the bullying took place. And so, as we look at the fact that these are the effects of bullying, then man, it's a topic of concern, right? It's a topic for us to put out there. And again, perhaps a topic for us to develop goals within our IEP with the school and or IPP with the regional center. If my son needs to learn how to deal with social scenarios, perhaps they need some social skills training. If my son has experienced bullying within the school setting, perhaps they need some counseling to reframe social scenarios and perhaps work on some post-traumatic stress that they may be experiencing, right? And so this really calls for help. If these are the symptoms, if these are the things that people are experiencing due to bullying, then we've got to do something about it, right? So what are some things that we can do, right? So one, there are some practical things, right? Because we know that bullying takes place mostly in isolated spaces, then perhaps structuring the student's day, structuring the teenager or adult's day, right, to avoid hidden and places where they are alone for long periods of time, right? So not being hidden in places, avoiding being alone for too long. These are some practical things, right? Not carrying too much money or expensive things, right? Not becoming a more highlighted target for bullying, right? Knowing how to walk, wheel, or run away from scenarios that may lead to bullying, right? And this isn't to teach our children or our, to teach individuals how to stereotype or discriminate against a group of people, but it is to help them recognize this social circle doesn't look welcoming, right? Or this person doesn't is not putting out the vibes, if you would, as the kids say, is not giving me a vibe of friendliness. Maybe I should walk away, right? Maybe it's not a circle that I should enter, right? And so being able to discern and being able to pick up on signs that say, let's go that way, right? And then telling an adult if something does happen, does your son or daughter, do you have the skills to be able to report when something goes wrong? Do they have a friend to tell? And this is where, again, social skills may come up. They may not have friends. They may need that kind of support. Okay. What can they also do if they have already experienced the bullying? Then perhaps managing those feelings, externalizing those feelings through something like journaling. Okay. And keep in mind that journaling can look different ways. When I worked with individuals, that had limited communication skills or limited written or difficulty actually writing, we would do a collage. We would journal by going through magazines and cutting out pictures that we related with, right? And so if that person was feeling sad that day, as they're looking through a magazine and they see a little boy with a cloud going like this, covering their hands, and they cut that out, that's a form of journaling. You're telling me how you feel. You're not putting, I feel sad today and I feel like a cloud is over my head. You're not journaling that in written form, but you're identifying with those images, right? And so that type of adaptive journaling or adapted journaling, if you would, can be of emotional support as well. And then being able to learn how might one person fight back without physically getting involved, right? How might a person defend themselves without physically getting involved? Then how might they work on, one of the things that we know about bullying is that sometimes the person who does the bullying wants to see a reaction out of the person, right? Wants to get a rise out of that person. And so we may work with our children, with our teens and adults to say, let's practice regulating what we feel, sort of brushing it off, even if just for the moment, as to not attract more bullying. If I react a lot to the bullying, then it may continue, right? Because now that person knows, oh, I made them cry, right? Versus if they kind of notice that whatever, right? It kind of brushes off, you may become less interesting as a bully target, right? And so showing them how to regulate their emotions, how to distract, how to use, I had some individuals I worked with that were very sarcastic by nature, right? And they were very feisty and funny, and their sarcasm was right on. And so we would practice that as a skill to combat the bullying, right? And precisely in the booklet that you can review, which is the Enough is Enough and the Adults Get Bullied Too booklets, there's a whole section on even using humor and sarcasm to fight off and to stop the bullying, right? If a person is coming, I think one of the examples in there is like if they say, oh, ew, you have a big nose, right? Or whatever they may say, like, oh yeah, I can smell really good, you didn't shower today, huh? Some kind of comeback among that, if that was a good comeback. Um, but coming back, coming up with their own comebacks using their strengths, right? If they're very humorous, if they're sarcastic, using that to their advantage to sort of disseminate that scenario and that experience, right? And so using and planning for that. Then another thing, so we looked at some practical things to do, not being alone for too long, all of that. And then some other things for us to do in order to even kind of ensure that we are learning about the bullying happening, that if the bullying is happening, our kids actually tell us about it. Excuse me. Um, that we create space for consistent check-ins, right? Sometimes what we find, even in all families, disability aside, is that we sometimes don't create table time, if you would, table discussion time, unless there's something going wrong, right? And so the idea here might be, might I learn more about what's happening with my kid if I check in with them routinely, right? That family time and table time is not just structured when we got a bad report or when we got a call from the school, but that our son or daughter knows that there is always space daily or every other day, weekly. There is always space in my home to share what's going on. And that sharing becomes so customary that they have continual space to share about something that's happening, if indeed something is happening, right? So checking in, how are they feeling? What may be causing you to feel this way? Tell me about your day in one word. What was your favorite part of your day? What part of your day did you not like? What do you hope goes different tomorrow? Right? These conversations, what word best describes how you're feeling right now? Right? How are you expressing this feeling, right? With whom? Do you feel like you have enough people to talk about how you're feeling? It may not, once children get to a certain age, right? Teenage years, even like pre-adulthood, they may not seek out the parent themselves to talk, right? So then we might want to set up things and people for them. Hey, your uncle is there, and he's always offered that if you want to talk, you could talk to him, right? Should we set up a counselor at the school? Do you want to talk to your therapist who comes to the house about this, etc.? Right? So, what strategies can we use to manage our emotions? Right? And so, when we talk about this, and I'll go through this quickly, but when we talk about this, it may be worth it then, even just the thought of teaching our children about their emotions, right? And I say children, but that also means teenagers, adults, teaching all of us, right? For all of us to learn how to identify how we feel and then how to manage shifting from one emotion to another. What you see on the screen is known as the alert program, right? And this is used for school age children to learn energy levels internally. Because energy is such an abstract concept, emotions are so abstract, then this thermometer of red, green, and blue is used to identify, I'm feeling on the high right now, right? My heart's beating fast, I'm sweating, I'm blushing, right? I'm red cheeked, my hands are sweating, my heart's beating really fast, I don't feel good, right? So that we can experience, what does high feel like? What does just right feel like? And what does low feel like? And then not just learning what it feels like, but then how to change from one process to another. And we call that self-regulation, right? How to go from feeling really anxious or really upset to a level where we can manage that emotion and react appropriately, right? And so as you think of working on sort of things that will prevent or address bullying, you may want to consider this for services that your son or daughter may receive at home. You may want to consider, right, using graphics like this, scales like this, that by pointing, we will learn how the person is feeling, right? Again, especially if the person has limited communication, but I would go as far as to saying it doesn't matter what their communication level is. When someone's having a hard time, this can be helpful. How many of us rather text than take a phone call when we're not feeling well? Right? There's a reason why we're given a pain scale at the hospital, whether we're verbal or nonverbal, right? Because in times when we are not feeling well, we may have less access to our communication and less access to organize what we're thinking, to be able to say it out loud in a sentence, right? And so being able to have these tools readily available, right? How are you feeling right now? And I would challenge us to not just use these strategies and these tools with our son or daughter with a disability. It's for all of us to model how to use this. I, as the parent, may be the first one to say, you know what? I'm in the red right now. I'm really upset. I just came from work or I just came from the road. There was this man waiting for the parking spot that I was in. He swerved in front of me. I am so upset. And teaching and modeling what this looks like so that it's not just, oh, you don't have communication skills, you have a disability, you use these tools, but none of us do. We can all benefit from using these tools and expressing ourselves in alternative ways. I remember in using these tools, such as choice boards with words, right, or pictures, but one of the best sessions I ever had with one of the girls that I worked with was through a closed door, passing a paper under the door. She was fully verbal, but did not want to see anyone that day, did not want to talk. And I just said, is it okay if I stand outside of the door with you? You can stay in your room. Can I stand outside? And I put a paper and I put yes, no, I'm not sure. I put all these options, right? And then I slipped it under the door. And I was just trying and seeing if it worked, right? To my surprise, she slipped it right back under the door and it said yes, right? And then I started asking more questions, right? Did someone say something? Look at you a certain way, do something, right? All these options or something else. And then she said something. And I said, okay, so someone said something. How did it make you feel? Right? We did the whole choices, right? I'm just sort of putting other scales on the screen. But then I told her, what it, not what the person said, not quite yet. I said, how did it make you feel? She put angry, right? And then she also circled sad. And I said, okay, now was the person someone you knew, someone you don't know, someone, right? And so through these tools, I learned more about that girl than I had ever learned in the past few months that I had been working with her, right? And so there's a lot of communication that can happen with tools like this. Okay. Another thing for us to consider in doing and sort of combating the bullying, if and when it's happening, right, is practicing such positive thinking and such affirmations to the person, right, that their bucket, if you would be so full that whenever someone does say something negative about them, that it could genuinely roll off, right? And again, let's put disability aside. You and I, when we experience a comment from the outside, doesn't it matter what our internal voices sound like? If I have a lot of people, a lot of positive reinforcement in my life, if my own thoughts sound like the people who speak over me, saying positive things, and I feel confident, when one person comes and says something that may be offensive, it may hurt, but it may not crumble me as much because I'm so full of the other positive things, right? And so one thing to consider in this is, how can I routinely, right, fill my son's bucket, right? How can I focus on their strengths so that they're so confident in their strengths that they don't really mind, right? Or they're not as impacted by someone who points out their limitation or disability. And again, even taking disability aside, we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses. If I am pretty confident and aware of the things that I'm really good at, you know what? I may not care as much that someone made fun of me because I, true story, I have no sense of direction, so I get lost all the time. I need Google Maps forever, right? And I'm not a great cook, right? But I have other skills that I'm really proud of, right? And that I've received so much positive reinforcement for that I'm like, so I'm not a cook. So I will never be a chauffeur because I will get lost. Who cares? Kind of thing, right? But what occurs, I think, sometimes within our culture and within sometimes our home when someone has a disability is we're so focused on the disability. And very little at times do we focus on the things that they're good at. And so if at home we only talk about my disability and then I go to school and I'm being made fun of for my disability, man, I have nothing positive to fall on. But if we can create space and opportunity and practice in positive thinking, then maybe that too can help us oppose and fight the bully, if you would, right? Now, on another level, and you'll see this again on the booklet, that then we do there is room for us to also practice taking action, right? We can do the mushy stuff of building our our self-esteem up and all that. We can do that part, and then we can teach them how to take action, right? But again, we come back to the topic of self-advocacy, right? To take action, they must be self-advocates, right? They must be able to express themselves, right? And use their voice, whether that voice is actual verbal communication or their voice in terms of whatever tools they have to defend themselves, right? So using strong messages, things that are easy to remember, what we mentioned earlier, humor, not caring, slightly sarcastic, using all those tools and practicing those scenarios where they're actually practicing saying, I don't like that. I need space. I didn't, right? Or practicing telling a person, hey, this person just did this and this and that, right? So practicing this, just like we have muscle memory, right, in our movement and in our body, there's also this element of muscle memory in us being able to express ourselves. And the more used to we are expressing ourselves, the more, right, ideally, that we'll be able to advocate for ourselves in a scenario of bullying. Okay, so um, we can, again, these are continued practical things. We can tell the bully to stop, help the person get away from the bully, um, being a good friend, calling for help. So this is the part that I was mentioning earlier of we can then teach our children or teens or adults not just how to manage bullying scenarios for themselves, but how to be a friend, how to intervene, and how to take action on behalf of someone else, right? Now, we can do all the practical, we can do all of the emotional, and then there is time to take action in a more official way, right? And so do know that there are anti-bullying laws. For the state of California, know that there are state laws that say that every school should have an anti-bullying policy. That is the law. And so today, this week, you can ask your school the next time you're there to share what is their bullying policy or anti-bullying policy, right? If they don't have one, perhaps that is something to advocate for and to point out and say there's state laws that require every school have anti-bullying or policies and a complaint procedure in place. What's yours? Maybe I want to go to the next board meeting, right? And bring this up collaboratively, right? Assertively, collaboratively, right? And say, hey, bullying is such a concern among all children, especially for people with disabilities. And so I want to ask the board and the school, what are we doing about it? We don't even have a policy, and by law, we need to. So how are we working on that, right? We can advocate systemically for those things. Schools are also by law encouraged, right? And that's important to distinguish in the law. Some, when we see in the law that it says must or shall, that means they have to. So they shall have an anti-bullying policy and a complaint procedure, but they may have strategies and trainings and other activities in their school to reduce the bullying, right? So the law demands anti-bullying policies and encourages, hey, every school should maybe have events and activities that target the reduction of bullying, right? And so if that stuff isn't happening within your school, you may want to advocate, right? And again, it's helpful to know that these laws exist because, and so the law is backing you up in this advocacy. Excuse me. Now, when we look federally, right? Federal laws, there are federal laws that bullying and disability harassment are a form of discrimination. Also, if my son or daughter is being discriminated within the school district, then I can also argue that that itself is a hostile learning environment, which then means that they may not be receiving a fair and appropriate public education, right? A fair, appropriate public education. If you've heard this, it's a term for special education, and that is your right. Students must have the right to FAPE, a free, appropriate public education. And so, again, the argument might be, if my son is being bullied at school, it's a hostile environment, not conducive to learning. Therefore, it's not an appropriate education. They may be then, we can argue, in violation of FAPE, which is a federal law, right? Because if they're being discriminated against, then it's not an appropriate education, okay? The other thing that we can do, as we've been sort of discussing throughout the presentation, is ask for services, either to address the current bullying or to prevent, okay? Use the IEP to list goals related to bullying, whether that may be self-expression, whether that may be social skills, whether it may be the need for a one-on-one or a personal assistant, okay? Keep in mind, you do not have to wait a whole year or for your next IEP. You can always ask for an IEP, okay, as appropriate, as reasonable at times, and they must take, after your request, they must hold that IEP meeting within 30 days of you requesting that meeting. That is why we encourage, do your request in writing. Have evidence, a receipt, right? Or through registered mail, you can also get that receipt. Have evidence that they received your letter. And once they receive your letter, the clock starts ticking. They have 30 days, right, to hold this meeting. You don't have to wait till your next meeting. So in this meeting, then emphasize that your child cannot make educational progress on their existing IEP goals if there is bullying taking place, if indeed this is the case, right? And you can argue, again, FAPE cannot be achieved. If my son is so nervous and so stressed, right, about the bullying taking place, this is not an appropriate education, right? Therefore, he's not getting FAPE. Know that in the booklet of Enough is Enough, on pages 26 and 28, if I'm not mistaken, there are actual examples of IEP goals that you may integrate into your IEP, okay? And so please feel free to review those so that you can include those in your IEP. In order to practice self-advocacy, in order to get your son or daughter more involved in their own education, their own life, getting them used to advocating for themselves, you may want to begin including them in one way or another in their planning meetings, in their IEPs, in their IPPs, right? You may want to do that, okay? And so this is just a quick form that we can use to have our children be involved, have our teens or adults be involved in the planning of their meetings. Okay. So, what else? When all these things have not fixed the problem, when they have not worked, then it may be time to resort to other strategies or other actions. So, assault charges against the person doing the bullying can be filed with your local police department. And if it has reached that level, then maybe that's warranted. You can also request due process with the school or against the school over disagreements about what should go into the IEP. If they're saying, we don't think he needs this bullying goal or these goals related to bullying in his IEP, if all else fails, you may want to consider going to a due process. And that is a legal process where the school and you propose or pose their arguments, and a hearing judge determines the side, right? So whether, yes, that belongs in the IEP or not. Okay. You can also do a compliance complaint. If you have an IEP and there are services that are in your IEP that are not being implemented, and right now we're focusing on perhaps, right, the bullying related services, you can do a compliance complaint with the California Department of Education. Okay. If you believe that the school has not implemented what is in your child's IEP. Okay. Do know that state compliance complaints are done for things that have occurred in the past year, within 1 year of the alleged violation. Okay. So if something happened 6 months ago, you still can. You can do a state compliance complaint. Okay. Further, if those things don't sound like options for you, then you may do a civil rights complaint. If the bullying, right, definitely points to the fact that your son is being targeted or your daughter is being targeted and discriminated against because of their disability, you may have a case for doing a civil rights complaint with the U.S. Department of Education, specifically the Office of Civil Rights, alleging discrimination in education on the basis of disability. Okay. Do know that this must be filed within 180 calendar days of the alleged discrimination. So once we get into these more official responses or actions, do keep in mind that there are time limits to some of these actions. Okay. Then lastly on here, a complaint with the U.S. Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, alleging disability discrimination in education, right? So a different form of it. And this one with the U.S. Department of Justice, that one has no time limit. So you can submit a complaint such as this one with no time restraint. Okay. Where else can you go for help? Know that there are client rights advocates at each regional center, right? And so here is a general number. Disability Rights California is also they're rights advocates. And so they may be someone to reach out to. And then ourselves, the state council, right? You can tell us about what may be happening. You can reach out to us. We can help find your regional office. Know that the state council, we have 12 regional offices. Okay. And so we can help you get in contact with your office. I've left here a few other resources. Pacers National Bullying Prevention Center has a lot of great resources. And so you can also subscribe to their newsletter. Stop Bullying is also a great tool. Kids Against Bullying also has wonderful resources for parents on how to address bullying, how to talk about bullying, all of that. Okay, there's also other kits here and information that may be helpful to you. Okay, so we are very grateful for this opportunity and this space to share about this. If you would like to stay connected with our office by receiving newsletters, please feel free to subscribe to our newsletter. I'll go ahead and put that on the chat. Feel free to reach out to our office. We can connect you with it. And I will gladly, again, on the chat, put the link where you can have access to all of this information. I will also place briefly a link for our survey. So we hope that this has been beneficial. Again, as we consider bullying, keeping in mind how self-advocacy plays a role, right? And how preparing our children, teens, adults to be better self-advocates can, in a way, right, be a prevention to bullying. And feel free to reconsider your IPP, reconsider your IEP, and consider if indeed your son or daughter currently has goals in order to prevent or deal with bullying that has occurred. And again, to prevent bullying, period. Okay, so thank you very much for this time in this space, and I will pass it over and then happy to take questions toward the end.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording now so we can start our questions.